Okay, so let's now talk about one of the descending pathways, and probably the main descending pathway is the corticospinal tract, particularly the lateral corticospinal tract. Um, the corticospinal tract is involved or assists in the movements of our limbs, our muscles. So, a sort of deficit in the corticospinal tract will produce characteristic lesions, which we'll look at in a bit. So, most of the fibers of the corticospinal tract will actually come from the precentral gyrus. Sorry, that's meant to say gyrus. It'll come from the precentral gyrus. But then you also get some of the fibers coming from the premotor cortex and the supplementary motor areas, and also a bit from the parietal lobe. But the main or the majority of them will come from the precentral gyrus, which is also your primary motor cortex. So it starts with the fibers originating from the primary motor cortex. So obviously it's a descending pathway. We're going to work our way from the top to the bottom. With the ascending ones, we started from the spinal cord going up, but now we're going to go top to bottom. So starting from the primary motor cortex, it will go through white matter. So the axons will obviously go through white matter, because that's what white matter is, it's axons. And the axons that it will go through is initially the corona radiata, and it'll work its way down, and the fibers will sort of get compacted here, and where they compact, it's actually going through the internal capsule. So that's also white matter fibers. So then it'll compact and go through the internal capsule. It then gets to the pons, where the fibers just start to fan out a bit. And the most important part is when it comes to the brainstem. So it'll pass the midbrain, it'll pass the pons, and then it'll come to the medulla. Now when it comes to the medulla, this is where the fibers will decussate, and that just means that the fibers will cross. And where it crosses, so in your medulla you have the olives, you have the pyramids, right? So the olives are more lateral, pyramids are more medial, and so the fibers will cross at the levels of the pyramid, and that's why we say that there's pyramidal decussation. So all that means is that the corticospinal tract fibers will cross over at the level of the pyramids. Note that not all fibers will cross, about 85% will cross, 85 to 90, and the rest will just head sort of straight down to the spinal cord. The ones that cross will then come down into the spinal cord, and they'll be on the lateral aspect of the spinal cord. The ones that come straight down will then cross in the ventral white commissure. So remember, we talked about the spinothalamic tract, how they cross over in the ventral white commissure. Well, so will the ones that did not cross initially. So let's come on to lesions now. Remember that the corticospinal tract crosses at the level of the pyramid. So this means that any lesion below the pyramid, for example in the spinal cord, is going to be an ipsilateral signs and symptoms. And this is because, let's say that this is the right side, let's say this is the left side. As the corticospinal tract is coming down, it's crossed, comes down to the spinal cord, it's going to synapse with a lower motor neuron. Lower motor neurons are those which will synapse in the spinal cord and then directly innervate any muscle. So let's pretend this will go onto the biceps then. If the lesion is here, down here, on the left side, which is innervating the left bicep, obviously a lesion down here will affect your left biceps. It's going to be an ipsilateral problem. And then contralateral will have to be above the pyramid. So for example, up here on the right side, there's a lesion here. Well, if you trace it down, then it's going to affect your left bicep. So it's going to be contralateral signs and symptoms. The other thing we need to know is whether the symptom, if it's, for example, in the spinal cord, the lesion, whether it'll be lower motor neuron signs or upper motor neuron signs. So we'll talk about the signs of each in the next video. But so for now, let's just keep these terms in mind. If the lesion is at C5, for example, then at C5, if we have a hemisection, we will get lower motor neuron signs at the level of the lesion. And this is because if there's a hemisection here, this red thing is a hemisection. Well, it's obviously affected our lower motor neuron, which is coming in as well. And if that lower motor neuron there is destroyed, then it's going to be a lower motor neuron sign. Whereas if it was below the level of the lesion, well, now your lower motor neuron is still fine. But now the thing is that this corticospinal tract up here is what was destroyed. So this down here, it's not coming in anymore because it was destroyed up here. It can't make it through the hemisection. And so now your lower motor neuron is still fine, but now the upper motor neuron, which can refer to the corticospinal tract, and in this case it does. There are other upper motor neurons, but in this case it's the corticospinal tract. And if that's lesion, then below the level of the lesion we will get upper motor neuron signs. And both of these will be ipsilateral. If it was above the pyramids, then it would be contralateral.